Well, what is up, friend and fellow anti-netter? It is I, Scott Shepard here, and it has been a minute since I've done one of these first-person shooter, aka first-person note-taking, first-person note-carding anti-net videos. And so what I want to show you in this video centers around the idea and the concept that your notes are a means to an end. And the means is referring to the actual process of creating notes. And don't mind, I've like a lot of these cards are sideways and sticking out because I am about to start the section in my book on the actual process of note creation, which you can see right here. It's I'm going to be starting this section in my book. And how I start the sections is I go to my hub notes over here, and don't bother, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is kind of a side note, but I just want to explain why these are sticking out. And then I go through the individual sections and figure out which cards I'm actually going to write about and use and deploy in my actual book, the manuscript, right? And that's the essence of what this video is going to be about. It is about how notes are a means to an end. The end is your actual output, your creative work, your book or your paper, your blog post, or it could be a song, it could be any creative output. People can get creative, I guess pun intended, on their creative output. So, I refer largely to books and papers because, we have evidence that essentially an anti-net works for producing such creative output as books or papers, illustrated by Nicholas Luhmann's prolific production of 70 books and 600 papers published in a 30-year time span. So we know this to be a successful use case for an anti-net Zettelkasten system. Now, what I want to show you is kind of the essence of what it looks like when you actually work with a knowledge development system like the Antinet, which is analog in nature. And it's what it looks like when you work with a system that is a means to an end. And by this, what I'm really referring to is that notes are cues. They are prompts, okay? They prompt you to have neurons fire in your brain that recreate a whole idea that is almost incommunicable. And so what I'm going to show you is this, and I'm going to walk through this note card right here, because this single note card, what you're looking at right here, is a diagram. Might I say it's one of the most exquisite, beautiful, well-drawn diagrams that you'll ever see in your freaking life. This diagram, yes, this note, produced this entire section. And I wrote this section yesterday, okay? So this entire section from there all the way down to here, right? So this entire section that you are reading right here, and we'll go through some of it, was all created by one freaking note, just this note card. This acted as a prompt. This was a means to create an end, right? This was a means to create the end, which is now in manuscript form. And what I see in a lot of digital note-taking systems, and especially Obsidian, is people make a freaking career out of just tending to their notes and creating a digital garden and literally, having their notes be something that they're constantly editing, deleting, changing, and their notes essentially become their manuscript. Their notes become their creative output. Their notes become their creative work. Your notes are not your freaking creative work, ladies and gentlemen. You want chaos. You want ordered and structured chaos. That's what an anti-net is. That's what this is. That's what Luhmann's system was. It was not some beautiful, production. Look at this is to illustrate just how imperfect this system is. This is just one drawer, one section. I have like a math section, and like this cabinet is empty, right? And then we have the social sciences and memory science stuff over here, and it's like just kind of chaotic. You know, I've got some 3x5 note cards in here, just a weird structure, okay? It doesn't matter. You know why? Because your notes are where you actually do your thinking, develop the thoughts, and they develop the core idea and act as a prompt so that you can use them in your creative work over here to actually flesh out and create a prolific amount of work, okay, and just bust out a ton of content. Now, I'm gonna walk you through this card, okay? So what this card, when I drew this card diagram out, is it centers around the whole, this is called an I/O model, input-output model, okay? So there's input, processing, and output. The input in a note-taking system, such as the Antinet, is, you know, this is, you can't really read it, but that says podcasts, books, courses. These are the sources that you have a communication experience with. When you're reading a book, you are actually having a communication experience. You're communicating with the author, with a book, and trying to really understand what the author is trying to say, okay? So you are ingesting sources of knowledge right here. In the processing phase, you are actually creating notes. You are making notes. You're creating reflections. You're creating reformulations. You're understanding, and then you're applying and making the information that you've gleaned from these sources your own. Okay, this is the processing phase. And then there is the creative output phase. You know, this can be a, this could be a course. This could be a book. This could be a number of things. That's the output phase. Now, down here, what I did was I created analog versus digital, and this card lives in my analog versus digital section. Okay, so in an analog system, there's less quantity of inputs. Like you can really, ingest like less material, because in the way that I teach and how Lumen taught is, you actually write down the bibliographic details on a card, you go through the book, and you actually have to write and select information, with like a pen and paper, and you have to, record things that you want to extract onto an actual note card. It takes time. It's not as simple as, using Kindle highlights and just highlighting something with your finger, right? So you can really ingest lesser quantity of inputs, okay? And it takes more time. Like it takes more time to take out your pen and actually write down information and extract stuff. It also takes more time to do a technique I call priming, which is to actually write out the overview of the book or a source and your goal for reading it. With the digital system, it's you can ingest more quantity of information, especially if you're reading articles online. You just use an app like Pocket, and you've automatically collected and bookmarked. And a lot of the times people, they fall into the temptation of copy and pasting in digital systems, copy and pasting excerpts and information into their note-taking app, because it just, makes sense. Even though, people say, oh yeah, don't copy and paste, and a lot of people can believe that. Well, in practice, people fall into the temptation when it's right there in front of you to freaking copy and paste excerpts, right? It's and there's no blame in doing that. It just makes sense in a digital environment, right? In an analog environment, you don't have that luxury, so you're forced to do things the hard way. You're forced to stamp out quotes and excerpts onto your mind by writing it out painstakingly by hand. And in digital, it's less time. You can navigate from article to article, just like flipping through browser tabs, and bookmark and ingest information. Same thing with the processing phase. In analog, you create less quantity of notes because writing by hand is a little bit slower than typing, and it takes more time. It takes more time to figure out where you're going to install your card. It takes more time to actually create, key term indexes for your knowledge that you create. And with digital, you can create more quantity in less time. You can just spit out notes. By the time the day ends, you forget what you've even created. You've created so much stuff, and it's taken such little time that you haven't actually, really stamped anything into your head long term. Now, here's where the paradox occurs. The paradox is that the tool that, allows you to produce less quantity of notes and takes more time actually ends up, and this is what I contend and argue, and as evidenced by people like Nicholas Luhmann, is that the paradox occurs where the inverse erupts as a result. Your creative output is that you create more quantity of text and information in less time. And I also contend that the quality of what you produce is actually higher in analog systems. You see right there, more quality. And the reason is that certain things happen when you take the time to slow down your mind and actually elaborate with pen in hand on paper. And so with digital, I contend that you create less output, less quantity of output, and it takes more time, and the quality is less. And the reason is that when you convert your digital notes into an article or into a book, most of the time is just spent like editing and copying, pasting, and refitting your actual, what you've actually created, your mountainous level of notes that just crowds out a lot of the creative time for actually saying what you need to say. So this is what this card says. It's a diagram. I drew it out, right? And this single card formed the substance and formed the basis. It acted as the cue in the prompt that created this entire section in my book. And this section I wrote yesterday. So just to walk through some of this, let's explore some of this, okay? I'm going to zoom in right now. Okay. And by the way, the editor app that I use for this is called the Ulysses app, and it is, in my opinion, the best writing editor known to humankind. And I'm not sure about any other species, but at least as far as humankind goes, it's the best writing editor. It's a hell of a lot better than Microsoft Word, and it's way better, in my opinion, than an app called Scrivener, which is basically, the typical wet dream of an Obsidian knowledge worker that uses digital Zettelkasten tools because, it just majors in the minor, just like a lot of the digital Zettelkasten tools. Anyways, I'm not going to go on a rant and bash digital Zettelkasten tools anymore because, well, quite frankly, I don't really even need to, because, I don't know, what you're about to read kind of showcases some of that as well. Anyway, analog versus digital knowledge development. So I start out with one of the reasons why the analog component of the Antinet is so important centers around how it affects knowledge development. To put it simply, knowledge development is different for analog systems and digital systems. The very same principles I teach in this book cannot be perfectly copied to digital workflows. The reason why centers around the time investment analog systems require. The time it takes to slow your mind down and record thoughts stands as a hidden advantage of analog systems. To illustrate this, it's helpful to view knowledge development through an input-output model. And then in the book, I'm going to have, and I put diagram, this notifies me to potentially, I really want to get an illustrator for the book to create an illustration so that you don't have to stare at a drawing of one of my note cards, even though my drawing is impeccable and absolutely shows artistic brilliance. I'm gonna, save the reader from having to endure that. Anyway, I then get into what I then do is, because my note serves as a cue, it serves as a prompt for me to explain something, I then write the first phase. So you see, I write, in the input phase of an analog workflow, it takes more time to ingest information. With the priming practice I'll be introducing you to, you'll spend more time actually engaging with the sources you select. However, as a result, you'll be reading less sporadically. With digital workflows, one navigates from article to article sporadically. Even with a digital e-reader like a Kindle, one ingests information more rapidly than reading physical materials. With bookmarking tools, you simply click a button on any web page you visit to read something later. As a result, you end up collecting way more material in less time. As you'll soon find out, this isn't a good thing. Let's now talk about the processing phase. And by the way, I wrote all this stuff yesterday. I have not edited it. I have not put it in, a grammar checker. I have not sent it to an editor. This is just raw material, right? So it will get even further developed by the time it hits your eyes in actual finished manuscript form and finished published form. Anyways, let's now talk about the processing phase. This concludes, this starts the next section, right? Quote, information processing is the fundamental activity of the brain, as Steven Pinker notes. When it comes to processing information, the trade-off of analog versus digital, and that FN, by the way, if you don't know, that's a footnote. So if you see here, it's Steven Pinker, How the Mind Works, and the page number right there. And this essentially came from a card, and this was stamped in my mind. And actually, I think I stumbled upon this accidentally also. And then this allowed me to, add that quote, right? When it comes to processing information, the trade-off of analog versus digital is very much the same as the input phase. The analog workflows and, this goes down. I don't want to bore you. We're already 15 minutes into this video. So I don't want to bore you on reading the rest of this section, right? But I think you get the point. All I needed was one single note to create this entire section, right? And it took me about like a half an hour to bust out this section. It was really quick. And that is how a lot of this other stuff in this chapter has gone. It's just like, sometimes it's it's not always like a single note busts out. Look at this section right here. In this section, I have, writing by hand, a diagram, and I go into that, and I go into the long-term development of knowledge, of comparing and stacking behind different pieces on your notes, all of this stuff. But this gives you a little bit of an actual example of what it's like writing and creating knowledge using an analog system. In brief, I find it to be way better than trying to create something out of just an insanely large amount of digital material. When you actually use an Antinet Zettelkasten like Nicholas Luhmann used, you begin to actually experience the magic of the system, the true magic of the Zettelkasten, the analog form, with numeric alpha addresses, with a tree structure and an index. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Hope this was a helpful and informative video. As always, I've enjoyed this and I love seeing our community grow. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like button, the subscribe button. Tell all of your friends and family who actually value growth, learning, and developing your mind the hard way, the best way, the only way. Let's continue to keep this freaking train going and continue to create a movement around physical note-taking systems, and let's continue to pursue our true mission, which is simply this. It's to put Office Depot back in business again. All right. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Love you all. Talk to you later. Scott Shepper, over and out. Bye-bye now.